Somewhere in a garage right now, an engine is doing something modern engines were never built to do. It's revving past 9,000 RPM with nothing but air, fuel, and mechanical fury behind it. No turbo lag, no boost gauge, no electronic trickery smoothing out the power delivery. Just raw, linear force built entirely through hand-tuned engineering. That kind of engine doesn't exist anymore. Emissions laws killed it. Turbochargers replaced it. And the manufacturers who built it either stopped or they never will again. That's exactly why collectors are quietly buying up everything they can find. Not the flashy stuff. Not the cars everyone already knows about. The naturally aspirated legends. The ones that rewarded skill over horsepower, precision over boost, and character over convenience. Some of these cars sold for under $30,000 a decade ago. Today, the best examples are worth 5, 6, sometimes 10 times that. And the rarest of them? They're not really for sale anymore. Owners are holding on because they know exactly what's disappearing. This isn't a list of fast cars. It's a list of the last naturally aspirated engines the world will ever build, and the 7 that serious collectors refuse to let go of. For years, people made a serious mistake with this car. They called it common. The DC2 Integra type are sold in real numbers back in the 90s. It wasn't a limited-run halo car. It wasn't hidden behind a velvet rope at a dealership. It was, on paper, just a Honda. Affordable, practical, easy to find. That assumption cost people a fortune, because underneath that ordinary shell was one of the most obsessively engineered 4-cylinder engines Honda ever built. The B18C wasn't just tuned. It was hand-finished. Technicians individually polished each intake port by hand, matching them to blueprint tolerances most manufacturers reserved for race engines, not showroom cars. Every unit was tested on a dyno before it left the factory, and any engine that didn't hit Honda's power target was pulled and rebuilt. That's not how mass production works. That's how a legend gets built without anyone noticing at the time. Here's the part most owners never understood. Because parts were cheap and plentiful for decades, thousands of Integra-type RS got modified, crashed, or quietly used up as daily drivers. People swapped the engines, changed the suspension, and treated a hand-built masterpiece like disposable transportation. Collectors know exactly what that means today. Unmolested, numbers-matching DC2S with factory VIN-stamped engines are becoming almost impossible to find. What was once a $5,000 used car now regularly sells for 5 figures, and the cleanest examples are pushing well past that. Some original owners sold theirs in the early 2000s for a fraction of what they're worth now, back when nobody thought a Honda could be a collector car. Try telling them that today. What makes this one different from most future classics is that its value isn't built on rarity of production. It's built on rarity of survival. Honda made plenty of them. The market simply erased most of the good ones. And that's a pattern that's about to repeat itself with a car most people don't even think of as a real Type R. Because if the DC2 proved that a mass-produced Honda could become untouchable, the next car proved that Honda didn't even need to sell it outside Japan to create a legend. Honda never planned for the rest of the world to want this car. The EK9 Civic Type R was built exclusively for Japan. No federalized version. No export program. No dealership outside Japan ever had one sitting on a showroom floor. For years, that made it a footnote to most Western enthusiasts. A car people read about in magazines, but assumed they'd never actually see. That isolation is exactly what turned it into a phenomenon. Because Honda didn't just badge a regular Civic and call it special. They gave the EK9 a hand-built B16B engine producing the highest specific output of any naturally aspirated production engine at the time ever offered in a Honda. Over 100 horsepower per liter from a car that weighed barely over a ton. No turbo, no forced induction, just precision engineering pushed to a limit most manufacturers wouldn't attempt. For over a decade, the only way to own one outside Japan was through gray market importation once the car crossed the 25-year threshold. And that's when everything changed. The moment EK9S became legally importable in markets like the United States, demand didn't grow gradually. It exploded. Enthusiasts who had spent 15 years watching Japanese domestic market videos and studying spec sheets they could never buy suddenly had access. Import companies couldn't source clean examples fast enough. Prices that hovered around $10,000 in Japan tripled, then quadrupled, within a few years of reaching international buyers. Japanese owners who held on to their EK9S through the 2000s, back when nobody outside Japan cared, are now sitting on cars worth more than some modern sports cars. Meanwhile, the ones who modified theirs heavily, chasing track times instead of preservation, watch their cars lose the exact collector value that unmolested examples now command. What makes the EK9 different from almost anything else on this list is that it didn't need international marketing, a racing pedigree, or a big production run to become desirable. It became a legend purely through scarcity and word of mouth, in a world that hadn't caught up to it yet. But not every car on this list needed an engine this extreme to earn cult status. The next one became a legend almost by accident, and it proves that sometimes value has nothing to do with what's under the hood. Here's an uncomfortable truth for a lot of AE86 owners. The car most collectors are chasing was never actually fast. By the time the AE86 launched in the mid-1980s, it was already competing against turbocharged rivals with more power and better performance numbers on paper. In pure specs, it was outclassed. If this were only about horsepower or lap times, the AE86 would have faded into obscurity decades ago, remembered only by die-hard Toyota historians. Instead, it became one of the most valuable Japanese collector cars in the world. And almost none of that value comes from what the car actually does. It comes from what people believe about it. The AE86 became the centerpiece of a manga and anime series about mountain pass racing. And that fictional story did something no marketing department could have planned. It turned a modest, front-engine, rear-wheel drive economy coupe into a global icon, decades after production ended. An entire generation of enthusiasts who never saw the car in a dealership grew up wanting one anyway, because of what it represented on screen. That's a different kind of scarcity engine than horsepower or production numbers. It's cultural scarcity, and it behaves completely differently in the collector market. Demand didn't come from racing pedigree. It came from identity. Owning an AE86 became a way of saying you understood something other people didn't. Prices reflect that story, not the spec sheet. Clean, unmolested examples that sold for a few $1,000s in the early 2000s now regularly clear six figures at auction for the rarest trims. Owners who sold theirs before the culture caught fire are watching cars they once considered disposable become worth more than houses in some markets. What the AE86 proves is something collectors are only beginning to fully understand. A car doesn't need to be objectively fast, rare in production, or mechanically extraordinary to become priceless. It just needs to mean something to enough people at the right moment in time. But meaning isn't the only path to legendary status. The next car on this list didn't need a story. It needed 9,000 RPM and nothing else. Somewhere out there is a former S2000 owner who still thinks about the car they sold. Maybe it was for a mortgage down payment. Maybe it just felt impractical with a growing family. Maybe they simply got bored of it, the way people do with cars that never break down and never demand attention. Whatever the reason, thousands of original S2000 owners let theirs go in the 2000s and 2010s for prices that, looking back, feel almost impossible to believe. $15,000, $12,000, sometimes less. Today, clean, low-mileage examples routinely sell for well over double the original sticker price. And the rarest configurations, the early AP1 models with the most aggressive version of the engine, are climbing even faster. Here's why that engine matters so much. The S2000's F20C was engineered to redline at 9,000 revolutions per minute, a number that still sounds fictional for a mass-produced road car. Honda achieved that using some of the most advanced, naturally aspirated engineering of the era, extracting over 120 horsepower per liter without any forced induction at all. It remains one of the highest specific outputs ever achieved by a naturally aspirated production engine. That number will likely never be broken again. Modern emissions regulations make an engine like this nearly impossible to certify today. The combination of high compression, precise fuel delivery, and an engine willing to rev that hard simply doesn't survive current standards. Manufacturers chase efficiency and turbocharged torque now, not top-end drama. So every S2000 that still exists in unmodified condition is a physical artifact from a period of engineering that regulators have since closed the door on. Owners who understand that are refusing to sell, no matter what offers come in. Some have turned down numbers that would have seemed absurd a decade ago. Meanwhile, Owners who modified their engines chasing more power often destroyed the very thing that made the car special in the first place. A tuned S2000 might be faster in a straight line, but it's no longer the untouched engineering statement collectors are actually paying for. Honda built the S2000 as a tribute to naturally aspirated performance. Their next project aimed even higher. It wasn't just trying to honor that era. It was trying to prove Honda could build a supercar without ever touching a turbocharger. Most people know the Honda NSX was fast for its time. Almost nobody knows how much of that came from a Formula One driver most car enthusiasts only associate with McLaren and Williams. During development, Honda brought in Ayrton Senna to test early prototypes on track. What happened next wasn't a marketing photo opportunity. Senna reportedly told Honda's engineers the chassis felt too fragile at speed, and the company sent him back out repeatedly to refine it based on his feedback. The rigidity improvements that came out of those sessions became part of the production car. That's not a detail Honda advertised heavily at launch. It's the kind of thing collectors dig up years later, and once they do, it changes how they see the entire car. Because the NSX wasn't built to be a flashy exotic. It was built to prove that supercar performance didn't require supercar unreliability. Honda used an all-aluminum monocoque chassis at a time when most exotics still use steel, cutting weight dramatically while improving structural rigidity. The naturally aspirated V6 sat midship, redlined high for a production engine of its era, and delivered power in a way that rewarded smooth, confident driving rather than raw aggression. Early on, the market didn't fully appreciate what Honda had done. NSXs depreciated for years like ordinary sports cars, sitting in the shadow of Ferraris and Porsches that cost far more and broke down far more often. Some original buyers traded theirs in during the 2000s for a fraction of the original price, unaware they were letting go of a car engineers still study today. Then collectors started paying attention to what the NSX actually represented: a daily drivable exotic, a mid-engine chassis refined by one of the greatest drivers in motorsport history, a naturally aspirated V6 built with the same reliability standards Honda applied to a Civic. That combination doesn't exist anywhere else in the collector market. Prices on clean, unmodified NSXs have climbed steadily for over a decade now, and the best examples show no sign of slowing down. Owners who understand the Senna connection tend to be the ones who refuse every offer that comes their way. But the NSX, as exclusive as it feels today, was still built in meaningful numbers compared to what's coming next. The following car wasn't just rare. It was a car so expensive to build that Toyota barely made enough of them to matter. In 2013, a bidding war broke out over a Japanese car most casual collectors couldn't even name. When it ended, the final number left the auction room in stunned silence. A Toyota, of all brands, had sold for over $1 million. That wasn't a fluke. It was decades of scarcity finally catching up to reality. The Toyota 2000 GT was never built to make money. Toyota produced fewer than 350 examples between 1967 and 1970, and by most accounts, the company lost money on nearly every single one. It wasn't a mass-market experiment. It was a statement built to prove that a Japanese manufacturer could produce a world-class Grand Tourer that stood shoulder to shoulder with anything coming out of Europe. At the time, almost nobody outside Japan believed that was possible. Western automotive journalists largely dismissed Japanese manufacturers as builders of cheap, disposable economy cars. The 2000 GT was Toyota's answer, a hand-built, straight-six-powered coupe with styling refined in partnership with Yamaha, and performance that genuinely embarrassed cars costing far more. Here's the detail that turned this from a footnote into a legend. A modified 2000 GT convertible appeared in a James Bond film, built specifically because the production team felt Sean Connery couldn't fit in the standard coupe. Only 2 convertibles were ever made for that purpose. That kind of cultural crossover, paired with already extreme rarity, created a perfect storm for collector demand decades later. For years, most people had no idea what they were looking at when they saw one. Some 2000 GTs changed hands in the 1980s and 1990s for prices that look absurd in hindsight, bought by people who simply liked how they looked, not realizing they were sitting on one of the rarest production cars Japan ever built. Then the broader collector market woke up to Japanese classics as a category, and the 2000 GT's numbers did the rest. With fewer than 350 built and a shrinking number of surviving examples in original condition, basic scarcity math took over. There simply aren't enough to go around for the collectors who want one. The 2000 GT proved Japan could build a legend during the golden age of grand touring cars. Decades later, one more car would prove Japan could still do it, even after the era of naturally aspirated performance was already supposed to be over. Toyota built one of the greatest naturally aspirated engines in automotive history and lost money on every single car it went into. That's not an exaggeration or a rumor. Multiple industry estimates suggest Toyota lost well over $300,000 per unit on the Lexus LFA, a car that already carried a sticker price north of $375,000. In an industry obsessed with margins and shareholder returns, Toyota built a car specifically designed to lose money, simply to prove they still could build something extraordinary. By the time the LFA launched in 2010, the naturally aspirated era was already ending around it. Turbochargers were becoming the industry standard. Emissions regulations were tightening. Most manufacturers had already started downsizing engines and adding forced induction to meet new targets. The LFA arrived like a message from a world that was disappearing in real time. Toyota didn't cut corners chasing that message. The V10 engine at the heart of the LFA was co-developed with Yamaha, revving to 9,000 revolutions per minute with a sound so distinct that engineers reportedly spent as much time tuning the exhaust note as they did the performance itself. The tachometer wasn't even a traditional needle. Toyota replaced it with a digital display because engineers discovered a mechanical needle physically couldn't keep up with how fast the engine could rev. Only 500 units were ever built, each one hand-assembled over the course of roughly a month. That production number wasn't a marketing decision. It was a practical limit, based on how few people in the world could master building an engine this precise, this consistently. Early buyers didn't fully understand what they were sitting on. Some LFAs traded hands in the years after launch for prices below their original sticker, treated like any other exotic that depreciates the moment it leaves the dealership. Those sellers now watch clean examples trade for well over $1 million, a number that continues climbing as the car's significance becomes clearer with distance. The LFA wasn't just a fast car. It was Toyota's final, expensive proof that naturally aspirated engineering could still push past the point of financial sense, right before regulations made that kind of decision impossible ever again. There won't be another car built quite like it. Not because manufacturers lack the skill, because the era that allowed it to exist is already gone. 7 cars. 7 different reasons collectors refuse to let go. But underneath all of it sits the same uncomfortable truth. None of these engines can be built again. Not because manufacturers forgot how. Because the regulations, the economics, and the priorities that once allowed a company to chase 9,000 revolutions per minute for its own sake simply don't exist anymore. Every naturally aspirated masterpiece on this list represents a decision no automaker is legally or financially able to make in today's market. That's what separates these cars from ordinary depreciating assets. A modern turbocharged sports car can be replaced by next year's model. A DC2, an S2000, an LFA cannot. Once the surviving, unmolested examples are gone, that's the end of the story. There's no factory to call, no future production run, no next generation to fill the gap. The owners holding on to these cars right now understand something the original buyers didn't. They're not preserving transportation. They're preserving the last physical evidence of an engineering era that's already over. So here's the real question. If you own one of these 7 right now, would you actually be able to sell it? Or would you be one more name on the long list of people who couldn't let go? Drop your answer below. And if you think we missed the one naturally aspirated legend that belongs on this list, that might just be next episode.